Been revealed in a Senate inquiry, the Morrison government received legal advice that its controversial robodebt scheme could be illegal. Internal emails show the Australian Tax Office was made aware of the concerns on the same day the government scaled back the system. Joining me now is the Shadow Social Services Minister, Bill Shorten. Thank you for your time. The government stopped the scheme, Mr Shorten. Lesson learned, fair enough?
Not really. There was $2.1 billion this government said that Centrelink recipients owed the taxpayer. But the problem is that the government used an illegal or an unlawful means to unjustly enrich itself from the pockets of vulnerable Centrelink recipients. So the question is not really 3.5 years later they stopped the scheme because they finally discovered that it was unlawful. It's they should never have started an unlawful scheme. How long did they know that it was unlawful? Who knew that it was unlawful? And how much money do they owe the people that they've robbed?
So do you think they knew it was illegal, and how long do you suspect they did know?
Well, there's a couple of case theories. One theory is that they didn't know and they're just incompetent, and that after I and other lawyers were pursuing them in the last few months, they went back and checked, oh, maybe it isn't legal. So that's one, their explanation is essentially they're idiots. But I think there's another explanation. I think they were so keen to make up a false budget surplus, they thought they could get away with picking on the poorest Australians, the most vulnerable Australians, the single mums, the uni students, the unemployed, the people looking for a little, safety net from the government, and I don't think they cared. So pick your poison. The reality is that we live in a country where the Commonwealth, the government, the Morrison government, and he was Treasurer when this scheme started, decided to launch an unlawful assault on 700,000 debts. And what the robodebt issue is at its heart, in case people have lost track of it, what it is that when you get a Centrelink payment, you get it over you may be eligible in a particular fortnight. Of course, in our part-time, contracted out world, people can be unemployed for weeks and months, and then other times they get some money. But you are eligible for Centrelink if you're a uni student or a single mum or a battler unemployed for those particular fortnights. What the government did is they said that if the computer averages your income across a year, they sort of artificially assume that if you had a good month one month and a terrible month the next month, they average it out and say you were getting the same income across every month. Now, what they then did is triggered an armada of legal letters of demand and debt collectors. But the law doesn't authorise just relying on a computer program. You've got to go back and check. So
this is where the government's been caught out. There's a class action underway, isn't there? Might this affect that class action? But what are the consequences? How are you going to pursue this other than political pressure? Well, there's a range of ways that can be pursued. I think the legal community last night, when they saw what Labor had discovered, and remember what we discovered, the government didn't want the public to know, even this tax office legal advice. In the legal fraternity last night, they were calling it a smoking gun document, a document which puts beyond doubt the illegality of the scheme. So there's the class action, 10,000 people are signed up to that. We want to keep pursuing the government, though, because this government, their trademark is stubbornness. Their sort of fairly truculent refusal to ever admit they're wrong. The minister said, oh, we're just refining the scheme. No, idiot, what you've said is you've been caught out breaking the law. That's not a refinement. That's just actually deciding to obey the law. So we're going to pursue the government. Why should the taxpayers fund a legal defence against a class action when everyone already knows the government's broken the law? And by the way, the longer that this carries on, everyone who's had their money garnished by the tax office, an interest bill is accruing. So we, the taxpayers, are going to have to pay interest because the government took money which it wasn't entitled to from people, in many cases, who didn't have a lot of money to begin with. OK, let me look at another part of your portfolio as well. You're the Social Service Minister, Shadow. I know you've been to a lot of these bushfire-affected areas. You'll be there again today. Is the money flowing fast enough? Does it need to get out there more quickly? But also looking at the role of charities, is there anything that can be done to speed up the payments, the millions of dollars that Australians and the international community has donated?
Well, on the charities, I think they need to lift their communications game. People trust Red Cross and Salvos and others, and with good reason. And in past disasters, they've got an excellent record. So I have confidence in the charities. But I do think they need to explain what they're doing with the money and how they're dispersing it. So I think to maintain public trust in this sort of modern internet era of rumours and stories flying around, I do think the charities need to be very upfront with how they're dispersing the money. I also think it's a good idea to engage local communities in the disbursement of the money. By that, what I mean is that there's many bushfire communities who've been, fire impacted. In my experience of working after Black Saturday in 2009, the more you involve local communities, you can't make people happy because this is not a happy experience, but you can give them some sense of empowerment. The other part of your question was about the government and money flowing. I don't think the money is flowing quick enough. I've now visited most of the South Coast, and I'll be there again today, and I'll be visiting the alpine areas and also the northeast of Victoria and also East Gippsland. My concern is that small businesses in particular are falling between the cracks. Now, if you had actual physical fire damage, people get it. But there's a lot of businesses, tens of thousands of businesses from Eurobodella to Bega Valley Shire to East Gippsland and to other areas. These 2 months, December, January, that is their sweet spot. That's the golden time when they make 70 to 80% of their annual income. Instead, what happened, for example, in Bega Valley Shire, is, which relies $400 million of tourism, they had to evacuate 90,000 people. But what happens is if your business isn't fire impacted, there's not a lot being done for you, especially if your turnover is less than $1 million. So I think it's now time for innovative thinking. Maybe one idea which has been suggested to me from the bushfire-affected businesses is that their GST that they had to pay between October and December, that should be waived. Another proposition, Laura, to wrap it up, is tourism's really important. And whilst there's been an announcement of $76 million for tourism marketing, which is good, I think that we need to do stuff which encourages people to visit those regions on the ground. One idea which I heard from one small business is perhaps people could, if they go and spend $250 in one of the affected local government areas in a business, they can keep the receipts and claim it off their tax. That's common sense. It's people coming to the region. The money has to be spent in the region, and it's an efficient system. It's not sending money out to people. It's just saying if you spend it, you can claim a little bit back on your tax. Now, these are ideas which are just from the community. They're not Labor or Liberal ideas. But small business and tourism. The other thing, of course, is mental health.
Will you put that to shadow, your shadow ministry?
I think plenty of people are discussing ideas. Mike Kelly's the member for Eden Monero, Fiona Phillips, the member for Gilmore, and Susan Templeman in Macquarie in the Blue Mountains. They've got a host of good ideas. And listen, Liberals have got ideas too, and Nats. What we need now is common sense to help provide cash flow. It's all about cash flow. Offering businesses loans when a business can't repay the loan is, like offering someone some water but they don't have a cup.
Well, you say a lot of Nationals, Liberals and Labor Party members have a lot of good ideas. If I could just pivot somewhat to what's going on with the Nationals. Barnaby Joyce has apparently warned the Prime Minister that there could be a revolt, there will be a blocking of coalition legislation in the House because the supporters of Barnaby Joyce haven't been rewarded to the front bench. Labor wouldn't be seeking to take political advantage of this situation at all, would it?
Well, it's a bit hard to accuse Labor of the instability in the National Party. But one thing Labor has learned is that, not everyone in your party has to agree with each other, but it is important to power share. So I don't know if what Mr Joyce says about Mr McCormack's right, but if Mr McCormack, because he's angry at Mr Joyce, has punished all of Mr Joyce's supporters and rewarded all of his own, that's not the way to run a political party. Political parties are bigger than one person. You get the best, and I mean, to be honest, if that's the way McCormack's running the Nats,
well,
that's
the
symbolic.
case. Shouldn't you be in cabinet, in shadow cabinet?
Shouldn't who?
You be in shadow
Me?
cabinet.
Oh, I am. I am.
I stand corrected.
I've got to lift that profile of mine.
I stand corrected.
But the point is, Morrison, you know, he can't work with Labor. He finds it chronically impossible to. At this point in our nation's history, you've got the fires, you've got the virus, we've got anemic wages growth, you know, battlers are feeling the pressure.
Yeah.
You know, retail trades down. This is a time when people should work together. But what we tend to get is tribal politics, and I can see that isn't a good enough prescription for the nation. I mean, Anthony Albanese has offered a lot of support in the bushfires, but Mr Morrison tends to view anything Labor says as an enemy sort of comment. And this nation needs better than that, leadership, not partisanship.
Well, Shadow Cabinet Minister Bill Shorten, I really appreciate your time this morning.
I'll work on my profile,
Apologies,
Laura.
perhaps.